So good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to everyone back here to the second day of this year's Sub-Sahara Spectrum Management Conference. So I hope everyone has had a nice evening. For those of you who are here in person, I hope everyone enjoyed the cocktail reception and also was able to go out and enjoy a bit of the evening in Cape Town. And for those of you at home, I hope you all also had a good evening. And it's great to have you all back here with us for the second day. So a few things just to run through before we start today. First of all, to remind everybody here at the venue that there is Wi-Fi here in the venue. Anna, could I get that? Thank you. So the Wi-Fi network at the venue here is Sub-Sahara, and the password is Spectrum Management 2022. So there is Wi-Fi here, so please do make use of that. Hashtag as well for the conference for anyone who is going to post anything on social media. Use the hashtag Sub-Sahara Spectrum, and you can also check out on there what other people have been posting about the event. A reminder as well that all of the presentations and videos from all of the sessions that were held yesterday are available for everyone to download. So you can do that using, there's a QR code on your badges. And there's also sheets out on the registration desk. So you can use that QR code or the link underneath to enable you to download all of the presentations and the videos from yesterday. And again, those will be uploaded today as well. So any presentations will also be uploaded today. For those of you at home, you can find that link in the email that was sent out to you last night, or also in the reception area of the virtual platform. Reminder on translation. So the majority of this event happens in English, but we do have a French translation available for everybody here with us in person. So if you require translation and you haven't got a headset, then please do raise your hand, and somebody from the center, we have a gentleman just over here. We'll bring a headset over to you now, sir. So we'll get that for you now. So anyone else who needs a headset at all during today, then please speak to our colleagues at the back of the room. And finally, I wanted to once again say a big thank you to all of our sponsor and partner organizations for their support of the event. So you can see on the screen here the logos for all of the organizations who were involved in the event, and we really do appreciate each and every one of them and the support that they provide for the conference. So thank you very much indeed. And whilst we're giving thanks out to partners, once again, I did want to reserve a special thanks for our hosts here in Cape Town, to ICASA. Really do appreciate them welcoming us and allowing us to bring the conference here to South Africa. And I think you'll all agree that I can't think of a better place really to be having this, the first in-person since COVID event than here in Cape Town. And that leads me quite nicely on to our opening for today, because I'm delighted now to welcome to the stage for a keynote presentation, Charlie Lewis, the acting chairman of ICASA. And Charlie's going to give some thoughts on ICASA's strategy and what's been happening here in South Africa, before we're then going to be moving on to actually a case study of the auctions in South Africa as well. But Charlie, for now, delighted to welcome you to the stage for your keynote presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. And good morning, everybody. It says here I must call you Program Director. So thank you, Program Director. And good morning, everybody. I think I'm what stands between you and an interesting day's worth of presentations. But let me proceed. So Secretary General of the ATU, John Omo, is not here this morning, but welcome, John. ICASA councillors who are present, ITU leadership present, stakeholders and colleagues from the ICT sector, from the continent, from the diaspora, and those of you who are joining us online. Ladies and gentlemen, from ICASA, good morning. Welcome to the second and final day of 2 days of intensive discussion and learning on spectrum policy, spectrum planning, spectrum management. I firstly want to start out by recognizing and acknowledging the Minister, the Honorable Minister for Communications and Digital Technologies, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, for providing yesterday's overview of the policies and interventions from the department that are aimed at enhancing the development both of South Africa and of the continent of Africa, aimed at ensuring spectrum policy and management serves to provide universal access to affordable mobile broadband services for all, for economic growth, the creation of livelihoods, and the provision of social development. Secondly, he's not here yet this morning. I need to acknowledge Mr. John Omo, Secretary General of the African Telecommunications Union. I was with him at the ITU Plenipotentiary a few weeks back in Bucharest, Romania, and it was under his direction and leadership that a concerted effort was made to pursue and defend a number of African common proposals on a number of resolutions. And I think they made a very successful impact onto the conference. I also need to acknowledge Mario Minikovic, recently re-elected as the director of the ITU's Radio Communication Bureau for a second term. We congratulate him on his appointment. We wish him everything of the best. He's got a lot of work ahead of him, as you saw yesterday. World Radio Communication Conference 2023 is much closer around the corner than many of us like to think. So I'm very pleased to be given the opportunity to open the second session. Hope you are all deriving benefits from the discussions and from the debates. I think all of us share a common aspiration at a conference such as this, or in engagements such as these, to better the lives of the citizens of Africa, and by ensuring that Africa as a continent, as a whole, derives benefits from an equitable share of spectrum and space resources. This conference, I think, takes place at quite an important time. It's just over a year before World Radio Communications Conference 2023, and a few months away in the lead up to an important WRC second session of the conference preparatory meeting, which goes by the delightful acronym of CPM 23-2. This meeting will discuss a number of key issues and topical questions, many of which we have been ventilating here today, relating to spectrum management in the region, and it will frame discussions in the context of some of the key areas that will be discussed at WRC 23. So I'm confident that a lot of the discussions here will have an impact and an influence on those discussions. As the authority, as the regulator in South Africa, we are actively participating in the process. We have a number of colleagues actively engaged in various working parties aimed at identifying frequency bands to be allocated to the various radio communication services at WRC 23. A key driver behind much of this work is the need to ensure that mobile broadband plays a critical role in ensuring broadband for all. And the objectives of broadband for all are captured in the targets of South Africa's own national broadband policy, called, it goes under the name of SA Connect, and they're supported by the allocation. And as we mentioned yesterday, and you're going to hear from my colleague and fellow councillor Peter Zimri shortly, the allocation and the assignment of frequency spectrum in the low and mid bands, but also we need to be looking at the high bands as well to enable economic growth, social development, and to provide universal access and service. So our primary objective as the regulator is to ensure, or one of the primary objectives is to ensure the universal availability of broadband services and to make sure that there's a vibrant and competitive telecommunications sector that promotes investment and operates within a climate of regulatory certainty. We recognize that as societies advance, as development progresses, there's a growing demand for mobile broadband bandwidth and capacity. At the same time, however, and we've touched on this already, there are many rural areas in particular, but impoverished urban communities as well that continue to be underserved in terms of access to mobile bandwidth. You saw a lot of the discussion, or some of the discussion yesterday, focused on what is known as the coverage gap there, the uptake gap. So it indicates the need for universal mobile broadband coverage, a market that's best served by making available some of the lower frequencies with better propagation characteristics for rural areas. But it's equally important that spectrum policy and management, the focus of this conference, needs to be supported by a range of interventions in other areas that are necessary for uptake and usage. And some of that was touched on yesterday. We need to make sure that services, devices, and access are affordably priced. We need to make sure that there's access to a range of relevant, meaningful, and useful content. We need to make sure that our citizens and our people across the continent are empowered with digital skills to be able to utilize and benefit from the services, and that the whole framework is enabled by access to electricity. At the same time, we understand that 5G is the future of emerging networks and infrastructure needed to support the digitization of the economy and the societal activities, both worldwide and in Africa. So one of the key strategies geared at achieving the digital agenda in South Africa and beyond is to ensure that the policies and regulatory regimes for IMT 2020 leading to the deployment of 5G and moving onwards to looking at 6G are flexible, that they support innovative technologies, and they address the needs of end users. In this context, it's important to note that we at the authority have established in South Africa a 5th generation forum, which is referred to as the 5G Forum. It's an independent advisory body constituted by stakeholders in the ICT sector, and its intention is to undertake research and to render advice to us as the regulator on 5G and obviously moving on towards 6G, taking into account the integral role of 5G in relation to the 4th industrial revolution, so-called, and the technologies and services that are part of that slew of interventions, and making sure that the 5G stands to facilitate a positive socio-economic impact. The forum functions through 5 working groups, and as I often say to the colleagues in the forum, without the working groups, there is no forum. It needs to be driven by stakeholders, it needs to be driven by participation of stakeholders and the industry and the various sectors involved in order to focus on the areas of work. The 5 that we focus on are spectrum, research and development, policy and regulation, standards, which is obviously a critical area in relation to both 5G and 6G, and we spoke about this yesterday, use cases. So let me take the opportunity while I'm on the floor here to invite all of you present to join us at the forthcoming South African 5th Generation Forum meeting. It's a time of year, post-COVID now, where I think there's a slew of events like these crowding in on the end of the year. So we do apologize for inflicting another one on you, but this will be focusing specifically on 5G and moving towards 6G. It's about 2 weeks away. On the 16th and 17th of November, it will be held in Johannesburg, but like this particular event, it's an online event. So those of you who are following us from online can join in at that conference. It's going to have a couple of themes. It's going to be looking at the development status of 5G, both in Africa and worldwide. It's going to be looking, and that's where it backs onto a conference, an important conference such as this one, 5Gs as an enabler for economic growth, but also in relation to vertical industries, campus deployments, and the like. And then it's going to be exploring what goes beyond 5G, the road to 6G. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, thank you very much for your time and attention. I wish you a very productive second and final day of discussions, of debates, of learning, of growth. It may not be a decision-making conference, but I have absolutely no doubt that the engagements, the discussions, the debates taking place here will serve to enrich and strengthen spectrum policy and spectrum management across the entire continent of Africa going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. Merci beaucoup. Siyabonga.
Thank you very much again to Charlie Lewis for that keynote presentation and for opening our second day at the conference. And what I'll do, Charlie, I'll make sure I speak to your colleagues and get the link for that event you mentioned, and we'll send that round to everyone afterwards, so you can all get that information on the event that Charlie mentioned taking place in just a couple of weeks. So we're continuing the focus now on South Africa, and we're going to be moving to a case study. A 360-degree case study, we're calling it, on the recent spectrum auctions in South Africa. So we're going to be hearing both from the regulators, as again Charlie said, from Peter Zimri, his colleague from the regulator. We're also going to be hearing from some of the experts involved in the design of the auction, and also some of the operators, successful bidder at the auction as well. So really looking forward to this session. So I'd like to maybe invite our panelists for this session up onto the stage. If I could invite Hans, Vutomi, Johan, Peter, and Davis to come and join us up on the stage here. And I will pass over to Hans and Vutomi, who are going to be kicking things off and maybe introducing Peter. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Okay.
Ja, gaan die een keer op. Gaan die? Ja, zie.
Well, welcome again to this session. Session 5 is going to be a 360-degree view of the recent spectrum auction here in South Africa. I'm delighted to be joined here by basically all participants who will be giving us their perspectives, starting with Councillor Peter Zimri, who also chaired the IMT licensing committee, who was in charge of the auction, and his project manager, Davis Moshonyani. They'll be giving us the regulator's view. Then Vutomi Mabunda Jones and myself are going to be giving you the consultant's view. We helped ICASA in the implementation of this auction. And then after that, I'm delighted to be joined by Johan Smit from Telkom, who will give us sort of the bidder's perspective. So we're going to start with Peter Zimri and Davis, if I could ask you to come here and give us your views on the auction.
Thank you, Hans. I'm audible. Good. Yeah, thank you, Hans, for that introduction. And yeah, I'm going to share the presentation with Davis because he's absolutely the expert. I'm just the chairman. Yeah, it's very important to note that. And I also want to stand on the protocol that was established by Dr. Lewis this morning. And welcome to our online participants. Welcome to you. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to, depends where you connecting from across the globe. Yeah, I also need to be very careful what we say and what we can't say, because there's some confidentiality aspects that we have to adhere to as a regulator, and we just need to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a knot. We've got a lot of slides. I think what we will do, we will skip some of the slides because it's for background information and for information purposes and to inform people about the process of the auction itself. Yeah, like Hans mentioned, I was also chairing this committee, but there was a team of experts and also with the assistance of Nira Consulting and Triani. And before the the actual auction, we also had another set of consultants, Zenerva, that was based in the UK, and also there was a combination of the two and Acacia Economics based in South Africa. So they assisted us with the setting up of the ITA, the invitation to apply, and look at all the other issues. I just want to maybe, I think Ayman mentioned yesterday that South Africa never licensed spectrum over a decade. And I just want to clarify certain things. Yes, we did not license spectrum, but South Africa's got a technology neutral framework. And also spectrum sharing is allowed. In our law, it's allowed. And nothing stops the operators who come to the authority to share spectrum. Operators always had access to spectrum, sub 1 gig, they always had access to it. They had access to 3.5. In fact, right in the beginning, since I think 2002, they had access to 3,500 megahertz, 3.5 gig. So they could transition from 2G, 3G, 4G to now the 5G services without coming to the authority to ask for permission. But as long as they stay within the spectrum allocation plan and within the channel arrangements that we publish from time to time. Let me just step onto this thing. Just a little bit of the ICASA spectrum management institutional framework, as many regulators on the continent and also across the world. We do operate in this ecosystem of spectrum management. On the top is the ITU, R2, SADC, that's closer to home, and then also the locally our Department of Communications and Digital Technologies that deals with the policy making, as Dr. Lewis said this morning. And also then our sister companies, in fact, there's the aeronautical community, the maritime community that we also have that has an impact on ICASA's spectrum management framework and mandate. If you see, these documents are all if I just go step one back, apologies for that. These documents that's on display here at the moment, these are all our spectrum regulations that we had to put in place before we could actually start doing any licensing. Although we had some licensing process before, but these documents governs how ICASA license and manage spectrum in the country. Our latest document is the long-term spectrum outlook, which we looking at a spectrum plan or a roadmap for 5 to 10 years and 10 to 20 years. So that is contained in the document. It's a draft at the moment. We're in the process of finalizing that document. So to step onto the auction, I don't know if the answer, I've got 5 minutes, right?
10.
Well, I think that I will share the 10 minutes with Davis. In terms of the auction, I just come back. So the auction basically, though, can I control it, or is it control of the? So this is the high-level spectrum auction process map, starting with the pre-auction preparatory work. I think that's where most of the work was done, and then we then went on to the consultation process. Obviously, we had to look at all these various steps that I think Hans will speak more to that in possibly in his presentation on that. But at this point in time, we had to consider a policy direction that was issued by the minister. And that kick-started the entire licensing process. So we had to do that. The law actually basically directed ICASA to consider, we must consider any policy direction that comes from the minister. But the implementation is entirely up to ICASA. How do we implement that? So we had to look at that. We had to do a competition assessment before we could kickstart the auction, because we had to look at pre the auction, post the auction, what kind of framework are we looking at, or what kind of sector we're looking at, and so on. So we had to look at those kind of elements. Davis will speak more on those issues. And we also had to do the spectrum valuation. I think that was a very important step for us. It was quite a big task. The operators didn't like some of the things, but obviously we had to do it and make sure that everybody's either equally unhappy or equally happy. So that's basically what we had to undertook. Let me hand over to Davis at this point in time to take us through the competition assessment and give us a brief on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zimri. Is it on? Yes. Thank you very much, Councillor Zimri, for the opportunity. So I'm going to unpack the engine of our success in terms of the auction that we have conducted. Firstly, as we kicked off the process, we had to engage in a competition assessment, which was a very critical step for us to be able to understand the market in which the spectrum is going to be availed, and also to sort of understand as to how the auction is going to impact the market itself. So the critical consideration to that was obviously, one was the spectrum assignments that our operators already had, which was already assigned, so that we can be able to establish as to how we need to engage in the spectrum caps and also the minimum spectrum portfolios. So in our competition assessment, one of the things that we considered, or our view, was that after the auction, the competition will be much more intense, which obviously is going to be beneficial to the consumers to the extent that that's one of the ways in which we can influence the affordability of services that are rendered by the mobile operators. So another aspect, considering the market, we took note of how we need to impose coverage obligations that are relevant, coverage obligations that are also enabling to the certain extent. That was done towards tier 2 operators, which are sort of catch-up operators in the market, and then tier 1 operators that are sort of well in terms of their retail market share is much bigger than those of the tier 2 operators. And then over and above that, the support that we also gave to the tier 2 operators was to package the auction to the extent that we had a first opt-in round auction, which suggested that each and every player going to the main auction need to have at least a set of minimum spectrum portfolio. The minimum spectrum portfolio was imposed to the fact that we want each and every operator after the auction to be able to exert competitive pressure to each other. In that, we influence affordability of services that they, affordability of prices of services. Can you just, yes. Yeah. Sorry, can you, this thing is not responding. Thank you. Yes, another important aspect that we did was to do spectrum valuation. Thanks. Yes, was to do spectrum valuation. But before we engage in evaluating the spectrum, we had to take into account the competition assessment that we've done, which I've since discussed, and also the risks involved. And then we used two models, international benchmarking, which I'll touch on just now, and avoided cost modeling. And after all that, the results of those, because that is more scientific aspect of evaluating the spectrum, we need to strike balance from the artistic side. So that is sort of the things that we have done in setting up the reserve prices. So on the rationale of setting, on the rationale and risk, we considered the fact that setting low reserve prices is important to the extent that it will allow price discovery. Over and above that, we also taken into note that we should not set reserve prices that are too low to the extent that they will discourage allow frivolous bidding into the process, and the value of the spectrum won't really be gained. And another risk that we needed to manage was strategic demand reduction, to the extent that we did not want the spectrum to be falling in the hands of those that do not necessarily value it or going to make use of it. On the high side, the other part is setting the reserve prices very high. Setting reserve prices very high, it then minimizes price discovery in the auction, to the extent that if you look at maybe the evolution of the different stages, you'll just get a step instead of a sort of an S-curve, which suggests that the value is then discovered easily or determined in the auction. So those are the sort of risks that you need to take into account. And then in striking the balance, we took note of, obviously, like I indicated, the tier one operators, which sort of might outbid others, considering that maybe in terms of affordability. So that has to be taken into account, and that we needed to enable a third and fourth national wholesaler. To the extent that our auction, the way we envisaged it is that we needed 5 players after the auction, 5 credible players after the auction, which is 4+1, which we then reserved a portion of the spectrum to the WOAN at that time. And also to the extent that we needed to take into account that those that are going to be participating in the opt-in round are doing so in the consumer's interest to ensure that, what we had intended in terms of the objectives, that is going to be met. So international benchmarking, what we've done was we achieved 2 things with international benchmarking. Considering the bands that we were going to auction, we then did the study to check as to how much the reserve prices were elsewhere in the world, so that we can be able to normalize those values and set the reserve prices at those sort of prices, and also to have a view as to at what amount of money was those spectrum sold at the end of those auctions that were conducted elsewhere in the world. And then over and above that, we also engaged in the avoided cost modeling, as I had indicated, which involved estimating the network deployment costs for operators in South Africa over a period of time. It was helpful to understand how access to additional spectrum may reduce deployment costs. Such cost reduction were an indication of what an operator might be willing to pay for the spectrum, which is sort of a good practice when you're licensing the spectrum through a market approach. And this is sort of the spectrum that we were licensing and the spectrum, the reserve prices that we have set. You will note that the one that was rather lucrative was the lot 5 to 8, which is the 800, considering the ecosystem, the availability of ecosystems then. And we also had lot 9, which had imposed stringent coverage obligations to try and deal with the digital divide. And I believe we didn't have, sort of disagreement as to how the values were, but we in fact managed to be able to discover the real value of the spectrum during the auction. So in terms of the opt-in round, which kicked off the spectrum, I think Hansi will be able to take over. Okay, yeah. So in terms of the opt-in round, we had 4 players, Cell C, Liquid Telecom, Rain, and Telkom South Africa that participated. In the main, these were the players that did not have the minimum spectrum portfolio. And then we intended to achieve at least 2 of them from the opt-in round to be credible. And Rain and Telkom were successful to the extent that Rain needed both spectrum below 1 gig and spectrum above 1 gig. And then Telkom only needed spectrum below 1 gig, which was a success for us to be able to achieve the post-auction view of our competition assessment. And then main auction, we had 33 lots that were competed for in the main auction, and that took about 58 rounds, making about 11.8 billion. You'll note that on that figure that on the 2600, Vodacom was the big winner there, and on the 3500, it was then MTN. And it is sort of our breakdown in terms of the results, the outcome of the auction. Going forward, this is sort of the picture of South Africa in terms of the IMT spectrum that we are dealing with. You'll note that for future, we've got about 400 megahertz of spectrum that we need to license. And we've got about 80 that was reserved for the WOAN that we'll need also to deal with. And yeah, we did not include the bands that are not decided at the WRC. And after the auction, we issued the licenses on the 10th of May, 2022, and we're still dealing with the social obligation to ensure that schools are also connected as part of the obligations that we had set. Closing remarks, I would like just to say that in the spirit of spectrum management, spectrum resources should not be hoarded by both the regulator. At most times, spectrum needs to be released quickly, and also the operators needs to be able to utilize spectrum efficiently to ensure that we realize social and economic benefits. We have started the second phase by publishing the information memorandum on the 17th of August, 2022 to deal with the spectrum that is still with us. In that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Davis. There are some risks that we also experience. I mean, we also had the digital migration process to deal with in the 700 and 800 megahertz band. Litigation was one of the big risks that we also experienced, or that there was always a potential litigation process that we had to defend and make sure that we don't fall foul of any regulatory issues and so on. The other one was basically we made a mistake of as a backup to the auction, because it was in the COVID period. If somebody's connection drops or fail, our backup was a fax bidding. And to be honest, it was one of the things that almost derailed the entire auction, because nobody's using faxes anymore. So everybody had to run around trying to find a fax machine. And I don't know who else is using fax machines in this day and age. So they had to run around, even Telkom. They had to find a fax machine. I think they found something in a basement somewhere that they used. Yeah. So that was one of the things that we struggled until the last minute to get a fax facility up and running. We did not achieve that, in fact. So everybody just agreed that we will delete the fax facility from the process. Answer. Thank you very much, and thank you to the colleagues for listening. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Peter and Davis. Now, if I could ask Butomi to come and join me over here. So we're going to give you sort of the consultant's view. So we obviously hired to implement the auction, and so we came in quite late in the process. We were not involved on the design, and it was purely sort of an implementation piece where we filled some gaps. All we could do was fill some gaps in the auction rules. There was some uncertainty around some aspects, which I'll go into more detail in a moment. But effectively, we won a bid to implement the auction in early 2021. That was NERA Economic Consulting. So we design and implement spectrum auctions. We also work for bidders around the world on their bid strategies in these auctions. And we teamed up with Tahani auctioneers, so Butomi Jones and Dr. Tahani Mabunda, who run Tahani, a South African-based auctions house. And so that was our team, our setup. And Butomi, if you could say a few words on the...
Thank you. So we had some challenges coming into the auction, and that was mostly due to the short spectrum capacity in the industry. Am I audible? Am I audible now? Okay. All right. So we had some challenges coming into the auction, and that was the industry was short on spectrum capacity, and past attempts to do an auction were frustrated by administrative delays and also in recent time legal challenges. There was also the COVID pandemic that we were coming out of, but despite that, you can see that we saw a very successful auction with vigorous competition. We saw substantial revenues across all the bands, 51% 5% increase in the volume of allocated spectrum. And all 6 bidders were successful in winning some spectrum. So that meant that the outcome was accepted by all the parties.
Yes. So as I said, we came in fairly late in the process. Usually we sort of do it end to end and we go through various phases. So we start with the auction design, and Davis has already mentioned how they've done it here in South Africa, what steps they took to come up with the design. Then you go into phase 2, the auction design, where you decide on the auction format. It was an SMRA format that was selected. You figure out the detailed rules and procedures. You come up with competition measures. Here in South Africa, it was a spectrum cap as well as an opt-in round where tier 2 operators could acquire sufficient spectrum in ICASA's view to make them competitive wholesale nationwide operators, and then set the reserve prices. We came in phase 3 on the auction implementation side, where we focused on bidder education, the software, we provided some software, and then we managed the auction. We also helped ICASA fill some of the gaps in the auction rules, which we'll come onto on the next slide. So our role sort of on the design front was very limited. By the time we were hired, the ITA was out, the applications were in 2021, but there were a number of gaps, in particular with regards to the opt-in auction and how that was going to work. So there was this opportunity for these tier 2 operators to complete their portfolios, to get to a minimum spectrum portfolio. But as they all had different existing holdings, it was not quite clear how this auction would work if some of them need a bit more sub-1 gigahertz, whereas others need a bit more capacity spectrum to complete their minimum spectrum portfolio. How are you going to create a level playing field? So that was not something that was sort of set out in the ITA. So there we came in and we developed some rules. So we started off frantically in February. Then there was an injunction, a legal challenge, which meant that everything was delayed by a little bit. And ICASA was then asked to review the ITA, and which allowed us to insert some of these elements here into the rules to make for a smooth process. So we developed the opt-in auction rules. We sort of helped on the SMRA, so it was a simultaneous multi-round auction where basically bidders bid for specific blocks, and that was set in stone. That's nothing that we could have changed, but we helped on the detailed activity rules and the round-by-round information policy. The challenge with an SMRA is always that they are known for their very long tails, which means that you're bidding on a block-by-block basis, which means only blocks that receive a new bid go up in price. Now that means once there's very limited excess demand, so only very few new bids come in, you basically only increase the price for blocks where new bid has come in. So in the 2.6, 14 blocks, if you only have one bid coming in every round, that means you need 14 rounds to apply just one increment. And there was obviously huge time pressure on ICASA to get this auction done by a certain time, within a certain time frame. So we added some flexibility on the bid increments as well as the round timing to allow us to complete this reasonably quickly. We also added details on exceptional circumstances, and on the frequency assignment rules, there was no mention of that in the ITA, so we had to design that as well. Basically, the blocks were sold on a frequency generic basis, which meant that you first figure out in the SMRA how many blocks you win in a band, and then you have a follow-up frequency assignment stage where you then work out the position in the band for each winner in that band. And we added rules to allow for online bidding to make for a smooth process. All right, and hand back to you, Tommy.
Thank you. So the online auction software was critical to the auction success. So Denera and Derani, we procured, tested, and managed an auction platform on behalf of ICASA. Our platform ensured that there was accuracy, and that meant that the software had to be tested prior to the auction, so that the bidders could. Am I not audible?
Yes.
Okay, so that the system behaved as we said would in the rules, and the bidders could then focus on their bid decision as opposed to having to tally up their prices and eligibility points. Then efficiency, so there were 6 bidders and they competed for 33 blocks of spectrum, each with 4 different options for each block. So we had to you can imagine that running a large multi-band auction in person would have been challenging. The last 2 are security and integrity, so basically ensuring that confidential information was protected, and integrity just logged all the actions of the auctioneer and the bidder so that there was an audit trail. Then once we were happy with the online auction software, we had to move on to auction management. We had an auction headquarters and we worked with ICASA to create a suite of tools and procedures so that the auction process ran smoothly. We rehearsed troubleshooting scenarios. We had advanced auction management tools and auction monitoring tools, and also we communicated with the bidders quite efficiently. So overall, the approach minimized any legal challenges, and the bidders were happy with the auction approach.
Yeah, just in terms of key takeaways, I mean, from our point of view, I think the auction shows that auctions can deliver. They're usually the best approach for allocating scarce mobile spectrum. A well-designed auction can deliver an efficient and transparent outcome. It provides consistency and certainty for bidders and reduces the scope for legal challenges because it is such a transparent process. But details ultimately matter. So it's really important to sweat the detail on the auction rules, because that then gives and creates confidence on both the bidder side, the prospective bidder side, and the regulator side. And you need to draft rules that are robust to any demand scenario that work under any circumstances. And you also need to provide the auctioneer with sufficient autonomy to manage the auction. What also is quite apparent here is that the auctions are very flexible. So we had these opt-in packages. You can have all sorts of policy objectives that you can integrate into the design to achieve your own policy goals. And lastly, I think it was the fact that we ran this online made it a smooth process for both bidders and us. We didn't have to deal with 6 bidders on site at ICASA's offices for the duration of this, so that really helped as well. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and yeah. I'd now like to hand over to Johan Smit to give us the bidder's perspective on the process. So over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? I think so. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Forum Europe and ICASA, and to be on this panel. I hope I can share with you some of the experiences of one of the 6 bidders in the auction. I was given only 10 minutes, so I said, well, okay, that gives me 1 slide, and I've got 3 points, so I don't know. Oops. I think this thing is a bit reactive. Anna? That's it. Okay. Very high level points, you know, as Peter also said, there's a lot of sensitivities and a lot of strategic information that is available in this auction. So I've decided not to put too much into the slides. Maybe I can just start by saying, yes, at the end of the day, I think the auction, the first auction for South Africa after many, many years was very well done, very well executed. It was actually really fun at the end of the day. It was very stressful. We had sleepless nights. It was many, many weeks and months in planning. You play with not monopoly money, you play with real money, and you have to be rational and you know that you are competing against very big players that have big pockets and they can outbid smaller operators, and then you have to do your best within the confines of the auction rules. Now, it's common cause that, we were not happy with all the auction rules, but we had to participate within what the rules allows us. If I can just briefly then just look at the pre-auction. We keep on talking about the auction, but I think also just to highlight that in South Africa, we actually had a dual process. We've got a beauty contest and an auction. The beauty contest, we had to submit business plans and business cases, efficiency plans, and show to ICASA exactly how we're going to use the spectrum at the end of the day. There were 6 applicants and all 6 passed. I can remember how we arrived at ICASA's offices with wheelbarrows full of documents to show that we can actually use the spectrum. I think maybe going forward in the next auction, we need to rethink that and see if there's not better ways of doing that, because there are also measures in the auction, as it was pointed out, application fees or even the reserve prices, it sets certain barriers, and maybe one can have a look at the process, whether it is required to have a beauty contest in addition to an auction. Data availability, we had some challenges. We all know about in South Africa the fact that the digital migration is not completed, and so it did create some challenges. Also because we bid on generic lots, and if you look at the 700 and 800 megahertz bands, the different channels have different congestion in terms of interference. So you bid generically, but you do not know what you will end up at the end of the day, and it vastly is different between 700 and 800. And so you have to factor into your design, that you could end up any one of these channels. And I think then the biggest challenge for us was the fact that we do not know when the digital migration will be completed. Yes, there's intentions from the ministry and from ICASA, but it has been many, many years and it has still not been completed. So there's always that risk that it can take another few years before it's completed. I think also one of the other small, obstacles that were thrown our way is that when we received the bidder information, we realized that MTN and Vodacom have returned some spectrum, and this in 2100 TDD, and this allowed them each an extra lot. It didn't sound like much, but if you think about what is available and you have designed your strategy based on X number of lots, and then all of a sudden your 2 biggest competitors have an extra lot available to play with, it changes a lot of things. So we had to improvise the day before the auction, a few days before the auction, how that is going to play out. In terms of the auction design, I'm not going to elaborate on all of that too much. I think the one thing for us that could have been done differently is the lot 9. Davis also mentioned lot 9, the coverage lot, which had a coverage obligation of 99.8%, and it was available for Telkom as well. But obviously it had its challenges, and I think it comes down to the activity points. It was only 4 activity points for that 10 megahertz of spectrum. It would have made more sense maybe to have 8 to bring it in line with the other 5 megahertz lots. In terms of then the second point, the auction, as I already said, the auction was very well done and very well executed. You also mentioned the online platform. That was a very, very good improvement. It allowed everybody to be in one room where we could actually debate and discuss our strategy and plan, and we can submit online. So really the online platform was a very good option. The opt-in round was also, at the end of the day, very well executed. Yes, we had some uncertainties going into the auction, even after it has been clarified in the second ITA. But at the end of the day, it allowed Telkom and Rain to obtain spectrum at almost reserve price due to Cell C participating as well. The amount of thinking going into that sealed bid, and everybody that understands auctions will know that the sealed bid has its challenges. You've got one bite the apple. and you have to make some rational decisions. We knew that Rain will participate and we will participate, but we were never sure whether Cell C and Liquid will participate. And we knew that if they don't participate, then we will pay the second highest price, so we couldn't go in too high just in case Rain went in very high, which they did, very high. And I think they bet on the fact that we will bid, so they will never pay their price. So at the end of the day, the opt-in round had a good outcome in terms of the price that we paid. Just briefly on the auction outcome, I think at the end of the day it was predictable. We knew that Vodacom and MTN will obtain the maximum spectrum. MTN dropped 10 megahertz for, I don't know exactly why, but they each have 110 megahertz, and they obtained that. Telkom, we managed to get our 42 megahertz cap, and Cell C and Liquid obtained almost nothing. Rain was ended up good because 75% of their spectrum they obtained through the opt-in round, which was at reserve price or at plus a small margin. If we look at the price escalations, for 3500, it was actually much higher than 2600. Compared to the reserve price, the price escalation for 26 was 190%. For 3500, it was 280%. So there was much more intense bidding on the 3500. I think at the end of the day, if you look at the price per megahertz per subscriber, Rain paid the most for the spectrum. If we look at the last few points on post-auction, I'm not going to talk too much about the assignment phase. That went well as well. The use of the sub-1 gigahertz band, I've already addressed that. We do appreciate the efforts by the authority to clear that band, to try to make it available as quickly as possible. We still have some areas where we cannot deploy it, and we are waiting for those DDD transmitters and the analog transmitters to be removed before we can deploy. Obligations also, Davis mentioned that we are still in the process of discussing that. There was maybe some uncertainties in the ITA. It's not clear exactly what those obligations entail, but I'm sure we will find a solution around that. And then just in terms of implementation, yes, so we have now also deployed 5G last week, as you would have seen in the 3500, and we are using the 800 exclusively for 4G at this point in time. We've got our 80% population coverage to achieve, and we need to improve things like urban area dead spots and in-building penetration and so on. So we are focusing on that at this point in time. And then on the way forward, Davis mentioned that the second licensing process have started. The IM was published, and so I presume we will have another round of spectrum licensing auction soon in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. Okay, so we're entering the Q&A now. So if you have any questions for the panel, please raise your hand, and then somebody will come around with a microphone. In the meantime, I have a question of my own to use the time. You've hinted earlier the fact that Lot 9 went unsold, and now ICASA has already started a process of, you called it the second phase of the implementation process of the licensing process. Can you sort of give us a bit more detail on what that will entail, and also perhaps your views on Lot 9 and why that went unsold?
Thank you, Hans. Can I go in? Thank you for that question. Lot 9, yes, obviously, I think the operators saw this because they had to achieve the 99% rollout. I think at the end of the day, possibly it appears to be more expensive when they ran all the models and also consider what they have to do. to get to that 99.9%. And I think that possibly deter them from actually going in for that particular lot. Well, they could have picked it up at the reserve price, and you could have access to 10 megahertz of spectrum or 2 by 10 at one go at that price, because it was priced a bit cheaper than the other lots. But at the end of the day, you have to consider the obligations. You have to consider whether you can achieve that rollout of 99%. I think it's extremely difficult in a big country like South Africa. I mean, where you have an SK area where you cannot deploy anything because of the square kilometer array project that we have. It's about 200 kilometers within the country that you cannot deploy anything. So yeah, that's one of the issues I think that we possibly at the lot went unsold. Going forward, we came to some agreement to license that lot as soon as possible, because it will be now spectrum that's sitting there, nobody's using it, and we have to reconsider what kind of conditions we will attach to that lot. I think that's the way forward, and the intention for us is to, as what David said, we already published the next IM information memo. Next step will be for us to consider the inputs, and then obviously come up with a direction forward, and looking at the timeframes. We committed, I think, publicly that we will hopefully by end of March, we will try to wrap it up. But as you see, as things are going at the moment, it will be quite difficult to achieve that target. But we will advise the industry and the public in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps, yeah, if you could state your affiliation as well.
Thank you very much. Bertus Emke, MTN Group. I think an important thing that maybe all of us are realizing, but we have not articulated it thus far, and that's the plain fact that years, sometimes decades of sound policy and regulatory management can be rendered useless due to a badly designed and executed spectrum auction. I would be bold enough to state that I think the most fatal step that a regulator can do is to not consult with an expert external group to assist them in the actual design of the spectrum process. It is those gray areas that you do not consider that ultimately kills the efficiency and results in you having to change rules on the fly because people ask questions that you've never considered before. Also, something which was gracious to a certain extent in the ICASA auction was the allowance of sufficient time. You cannot prepare for an auction unless you've got sufficient time. I believe a very valuable, and I'm going to ask that as a crucial aspect of a successful spectrum auction, is to run a mock auction. It's normally during a mock auction that all of the insects climb out of the woodwork and people ask questions that nobody has ever considered before. And then lastly, I think it's important to balance the capability of the regulator with the capability of the participants. You don't want the one to vastly outclass the others in terms of competence and agility when the spectrum is actually running. And interestingly enough, through all of the spectrum auctions that we've done this year, you normally find that your participants inside of a mobile operator that are best suited to participate in the spectrum are not the capable financial modelers or spectrum strategists. Sometimes it's the gamblers, but it's the ones that can think on their feet and are very agile in terms of what's referred to as game theory. And then just lastly, in closing, I think, Peter, when you said mistakes that you made that maybe you could have avoided. The only way to run an auction that has no mistakes is not to run the auction at all. There will always be small little inconsistencies that crawl out, and you can never satisfy everybody, but it's a collective approach to work for the greater good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Would you like to react to this? Or? Was it a question or was it just a statement? Okay.
It sounds like more like advice or a comment. Yeah. Thank you, Bertus.
Thank you very much, and I really want to thank the presenters for giving us an indication of what certainly is not an easy process. I just want to understand the value that was placed on the portion of making sure that the bidders were beautiful enough vis-a-vis the ability to bid high. That is so that you'd have, for example, was it a combined score in terms of allocation based on the beauty contest plus the score in terms of pricing, or once you are past the beauty contest stage, then the only consideration was price. That's one. And certainly to ICASA and probably the consultants, given the use cases, especially in this continent, are still quite limited, the basis upon which the reserve prices were arrived at, the basis upon which the reserve prices were considered. Thank you.
Okay.
I didn't get the first question. No.
Okay. I mean, to your first question on the beauty contest, first of all, I mean, the beauty contest was sort of baked into the qualification process. So there, you had to show that you are able and capable of delivering on your promises to some extent. The key, in my view, so once you've qualified, you go into the auction, and then it's all about the money, right? It's purely price based. So there's no sort of uplift because your documents were particularly beautiful. So that was not the case. Now, a challenge that in general I think that we faced was that the way the qualification was set up and the criteria was that it was an all or nothing. So that if any applicant had not met any of the criteria, then they would have been disqualified and would have not been able to participate in the auction. So there was no grading, actually, even though it was sort of set out in a way that would grade you, and maybe someone's application was a little bit better than someone else's. The way the weights were set and the disqualification criteria, you just had either you're in or you're out. Now, I would say, I mean, I'm just speaking myself here, but I'm not sure if you set the application criteria right, in that you allow only a certain type of company to actually qualify, whether you need this lengthy process beforehand, where you ask people to submit lengthy documents that at the end of the day don't add very much in my view. But that's just my personal opinion. Now, to your second question, what services are going to be enabled? I think that's one for Peter and Davis, I think, to comment on.
Yeah, just to add on the issue of the beauty contest. So there were three aspects that the beauty contest looked at. First is the technical efficiency, that you'll be able, in fact, to roll out the network. Secondly is economic. You'll be able to sort of break even up after some time and be able to make value, to retrieve value out of the spectrum that you are giving. And lastly, the commitment that you are making towards the social obligations that we have set out in the rules. So those are the sort of three things that we made sure that need to be adhered to, so that we don't license for failure. So that is the aspect of the beauty contest. In terms of how we came about for the reserve prices, obviously we take note that the auctions have been running elsewhere, like I said, in terms of the international benchmarking. But what is important is to normalize those values to head home in terms of our setting, to ensure that when we set the reserve price, the reserve prices that in fact are going to be talking to the market that we are faced with. Thank you very much.
Great. John would like to, I think, comment on
thanks.
this as well.
Just to add on that beauty contest answer, what you said, it was you had to pass. You had to get 80% out of 100% score. Otherwise, you cannot go into the auction. And then, you are challenged with things like Lot 9. Lot 9 was heavily debated because 99.8% coverage obligation for a small operator like us, as you deploy into the rural areas, it's not an exponential, a linear growth of base stations. It's an exponential growth because your population gets lower and lower. And then, our view and understanding was that, in the beauty contest application, we had to show to ICASA that we are able and how many base stations we had to deploy to reach 99.8%. Otherwise, we will not qualify for Lot 9, for example. So it was a really, really complex decision. It's a very costly exercise. It was not the ideal time of the year over Christmas and New Year to come up with that. And but yeah, we had to make sure that you get into the auction. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster.
So.
What did you gain from that, and how did it help the process? And second, there should have been some feedback if you have done some quotation. I mean, were there any or not, or were they ignored? Then the next question, which I want to repeat, which I don't think has been successfully properly answered, is the issue of reserve price. I mean, John asked that question, and I don't think it has been answered. I mean, did you have to do this financial modeling, or you have an existing process that will probably administratively give you an idea of the reserve price, but how precisely have you set the reserve price for each of these slots? Because each of the slots, the reserve price might be, I mean, a bit different depending on the condition or depending on the objectives. How did you do it? Thank you.
Peter, if you, yeah.
I think Davis will deal with the reserve price. Just in terms of the elimination of bidders, we had 6 bidders that applied or that came to the auction, and they all qualified. So there was no reason to disqualify anybody. But we had to look, I think this is what NERA Consulting assisted us with, is to evaluate those applications. And they all met the criteria. So there was no reason to eliminate anyone. So those are the 6 bidders. But we also had in terms of our competition assessment, as David explained earlier, we had to look at pre the auction, what market are we looking at, and post the auction. So we were looking at a 4+1 sort of national wholesale providers and so on. So that is what we had to look into, and that is your 6 big operators, and that's Vodacom, MTN, Cell C, Telkom, Rain, and Liquid. So those are the 6 operators that came to the process, and there was no reason to eliminate anyone from that process. The 99.8%, Davis?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yes. So in relation to the 99.8% coverage obligation, yes, we had advisors indeed, but obviously we understood that our 2 operators, even Telkom to a certain extent, they had reached about more than 90% in terms of coverage obligation. And the way we then considered the 99.8% is that we are not restricting the coverage obligation on the spectrum that we are issuing now. They can easily also utilize the resources that they already have to achieve what we want to achieve. Because basically what we tried, the objective is that we want all South Africans to be covered and all South Africans to be able to experience coverage at a speed of 5 megabits per second at the edge of the cell. So that is what's important for us. In terms of the reserve prices, I think we can all be honest in the room that you can never be accurate when you're setting up the reserve prices. But in doing so, you need to be rational and be able to substantiate as to how you got to this specific level. So avoided cost modeling assisted us into doing that, because we simulate hypothetically the operator as to how much the operator will be able to a certain extent, to pay for the spectrum at the baseline. But doing 2 models assist, because you can be able to ask yourself a question from one model: is this really the right value? Because you are dealing with 2 risks. Setting it too low, you're giving it to someone who's not going to be able to roll out. You're setting it too high, you're not going to get the true value of the spectrum. So it's a sort of a rationale that you need to really think about deeply. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much,
I think
Davis.
in terms of the data points that we collected, there was about 69 data points in looking at the benchmarking. On the continent, there were very little that we could find, except Nigeria and possibly a few other countries. But so the data points, we had about 69, and we had to average it out and compared with the avoided cost modeling process that we had.
Thank you, Peter and Davis. Fortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for all the tough questions, and thank you again for the panelists for speaking so openly. And that ends the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
And next up, we have Victor Quecker from the TCRA, who also ran a spectrum auction earlier this year. And Victor is going to give us a short summary of what went on in that auction. So Victor, if I could ask you to come up. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As introduced, I'm Victor Aikaeli Quecker. I work for TCRA. I'm a manager for spectrum management in Tanzania. And I will take you through, as a case study, the spectrum auction that was done in Tanzania and the experience so far we have got from it. My presentation layout, I'm going to have a short introduction. Then I'll talk a little bit about spectrum management, just 1 slide. And then I will focus much on the spectrum auctions in Tanzania and the future works. This slide, I think, is common. This is the experience most of the countries have gone through before liberalization, when policymaker, regulator, operator used to be like one entity. We had a ministry who is a policymaker, by that time also regulator, and in charge of taking care of the only one service provider who was there by then. There was no any dedicated regulatory regime to look after the sector. And thereafter liberalization, we see a spirit of responsibilities. We have a ministry with a policymaker setting policies and regulations that govern the communication sector. Then we have a regulator, TCRA, where I'm working, which is responsible to make sure that licenses are issued and monitor the compliances of those licenses, and to ensure there is a competitive and prevent any anti-competitive behavior in the market. Also, another prayer is operator. You can't just have a ministry and the regulator without having operators. So these are the key partners, and they are responsible to install, own, and manage communication infrastructures and provide communication services to the public. But I should say that the ministry, the regulator, and the operators, they're not just working on their own, but they have a common goal to make sure that communication services are provided to the public. So they have to look on the interests of the public or consumers altogether. I'm sure this picture is common to all the regulators. TCRA at the middle, we have three key stakeholders. That's the way we view our market. There is a government, then operators and consumers. And one of the very challenging tasks to any regulator is to meet the interests of the three stakeholders altogether. For example, for operators, they are looking for having a good and predictable policy and regulatory environment that will convince them to keep on investing in your market. For consumers, they are looking on affordable, reliable, and secured communication services. And the government overall is looking on service availability, universal communication services, that no one is left behind. At the same time, they want to see the communication sector have a positive impact on the country GDP and as a catalyst to other sectors as well. So as a regulator, we are working towards achieving these interests of the three key stakeholders. And as you may all agree with me, it's one of the very challenging tasks. It's like trying to meet the demand or the wishes of different stakeholders while you have limited choices to make. Spectrum management, as we all know, I know I'm not going to preach the converted here, but the subject matter of spectrum auction should not be looked at it as a standalone. It's part of the entire process of managing the spectrum. As we all agree with me, that spectrum is a scarce resource. Spectrum has values. The value of spectrum is not that annual fees that operators are paying or charged by the regulator. The real value of spectrum is not the auction proceeds that the regulator, the government, is collecting. The real value of spectrum is when it's put into use. If spectrum is not used, doesn't have the real value of it. So one of the biggest tasks to any regulator is to make sure that the spectrum, once available, is put into use to realize the full benefits of that scarce resource. So in these 3 key stages, I call them key spectrum management stages. We have the first one, which is spectrum allocation and planning. And this are the things that we've been working together as regulators and other players in WRC cycles. And then there is a second one, spectrum licensing and assignment. This is where spectrum auction falls. But I should put it very clear, spectrum auction is not the only method to release the spectrum for it to be put into use. I know most of regulators, we have practiced first come, first served in the past. Some probably they're still practicing that one. But there's a beauty contest. Some of the countries to date, they're still doing that. And there is a spectrum auction. Trying to do a thorough assessment of your market to ensure which method best fits your market. What fits on other markets might not be relevant to your market. There is a saying that no one size fits all, and in the release of spectrum, you have to assess your market thoroughly so that you are assured of the proper method that you are going to use to release the spectrum. And thereafter, the issue is not just releasing the spectrum. The third stage is to make sure that spectrum is monitored to ensure that there is a compliance to what you have tied on the license conditions. This is key from what I said earlier, that the retrieval of spectrum is when it's put into use. So you have to monitor it and make sure that whoever has been assigned is using it and to realize the full benefits of that resource. So quickly, I will go to the main subject about spectrum auctions in Tanzania. For some of you, you might be fully aware that we had conducted so far 2 auctions in Tanzania. One, it was in 2018, and the second one we have just concluded 3 weeks ago, 2022. But the journey for spectrum auction has not been a smooth one because as other regulators in the past, the spectrum was assigned through first come, first served basis. We had to undergo some training, number of capacity building programs, engaging experts, consultants on that matter. And this journey started 2015 when we had a workshop with key stakeholders about spectrum auction. As a regulator, we presented the matter to operators, and also we had an opportunity with operators also to do their presentation regarding how they view the entire process of spectrum auction. Because it was something very new, not done before in our country, back then 2015. So we had these workshops and also continuous consultation process with key stakeholders. At the same time, we had internal capacity building program using expertise from consultants who were familiar with this spectrum auction entire process. But between 2015 and 2018, there is a lot of things happened there. Mainly was capacity building and consultation. At the same time, we acquired a consultant who led us to do an auction, the first auction in Tanzania in 2018. And by that time, we auctioned 700 megahertz band. By that time, there were only 2 blocks of 2 times 10 megahertz which were available. We didn't wait for the entire blocks to be available for it to be released for market. So we auctioned 2 times 20 megahertz. And in that auction, it was led by the consultant. With those 2 blocks, we had 2 bidders and they won the auction at the reserve price. After that first auction, we went through number of capacity building programs. And in 2022, we did the second auction. This time was full handled by TCRA local expert team from the beginning to the end. We design the auction, we manage the auction, we execute the auction. And this was the results of number of capacity building programs as a country, but also as the region. Some of you might be aware through CRASA, we've been having number of workshops relating to spectrum valuation, relating to spectrum auctions. So we try to practice what we've been learning for quite some time now. And this was one of the big tests in our site, but we thank God that we finally succeeded to do it. And it was not just an auction of one band, it was IMT multi-band auction. It involved 700, 2300, 2600, and 3500. The entire process, as I said, it was handled by TCRA in-house team. Key stages in the release of spectrum through auction. You have a spectrum, you must have a spectrum roadmap, and then you have to do market and technical assessment. Your market assessment is really important. Auction design is very important, otherwise you may end up with unsold blocks, which is not an intention of any regulator. Information memorandum, this is a key document relating to spectrum auction, spectrum execution, and grant of license. These are the key stages that you follow through, you go through when you do the spectrum auction. I don't have much time, but the entire process have been documented. You may visit TCRA website on that link where you find all the documents relating to spectrum auction in Tanzania. Those are the bands and the number of blocks in each band that we conducted, we auctioned. The license duration was put at 15 years. We had coverage and quality of service obligation. We introduced spectrum caps to make sure that not just because one operator has financial muscles can acquire the entire blocks. So we introduced a spectrum cap to make sure that there is a competition in the market, even after the auction. Also, we had a single seed bid, 2 rounds, primary and secondary stage method of the auction. We had a reserve price. You look at it for each band, the number of blocks, these are the reserve price based on the market and technical assessment we have conducted in Tanzania. Payment methods, 3 installments. First installment, 25th of October. Actually, it was 2 weeks immediately after the auction. And then the second installment is 6 months after the first installment. And the third installment is 12 months later after the auction. And for the first installment, bidders, successful bidders were required to pay 50% of the auction proceeds. And 5 bidders participated in the auction. And this was the results of the auction. For each block and the bidders who participated in the number of blocks they've acquired. And on the set deadline for the first installment, 25th of October 2022, all successful bidders have paid their first installment and the regulator has granted them the license. Future works, as you might be familiar, back to the spectrum management stages, we say that assigning spectrum is one thing, but we have to make sure that spectrum is put into use. So these are the bands so far identified for IMT or allocated for IMT that have been fully assigned to mobile operators in our country: 700, 800, 900, 1800, 2100, 2300, 26, and 35. These now are open and they are used by MNOs to offer mobile services. TCRA or Tanzania, we support technology and service neutral. So some of these bands are used for IMT, either 4G or 5G, for those who have just acquired spectrum recently. So we continue with spectrum monitoring and enforcement to check compliance, to make sure the spectrum is put into use to realize full benefits of it. And then we'll continue with refarming process for all allocated IMT bands. As you might be aware, in the last WRC, there are some of the frequency bands that have been allocated, but some might not be visible for business in our environment, the like of millimeter wave bands. It will take time, but these are the ongoing refarming process. And then we continue to participate in ITUR activities towards WRC 23. And then we are reviewing our regulations to make sure that we have the regulation that support active infrastructure sharing, the like of spectrum sharing or spectrum pooling, at the same time spectrum secondary trading through merger and acquisition. Thank you very much, and this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Victor, for this very detailed summary. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but if you have any questions for Victor, I suggest you ask him during the break. And with that, I think, yeah, it's coffee time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you to Hans for that. Thank you to Victor and all of our speakers in that session. So as Hans said, it is coffee time, but before we have coffee, we're going to try and do a group photo. So if I can maybe ask our colleagues on the technical side to come and help us move the chairs off the stage here. So we're going to try and fit all of us up here on the stage or in front of the stage, I think. So this could be a bit of a challenge, but if I could ask everyone to make your way forward, and if we could get these chairs moved off stage, I'll come give you a hand in a second as well. And then we're going to try and have a group photo. Is that what? Yes, photographers here as well. So if I could ask everyone to come up to the front, and we'll try and get a group photo before we go to the coffee.
No, it's all good, but you look stressed and you sped up something.